Hi everyone, William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri YouTube series. We are in 1914, March 19th, 1914, with a longish letter that Dmitri wrote to Nicholas II, Uncle Nicky as he called him, the emperor. So the first dividing the letter into parts for the videos. In the first part, Dmitri talked about how he was feeling a little isolated, I guess, not with any family members. So he had intended to write a postcard to Nicholas, but he decided to write a long letter instead, even though he didn't like writing letters. And he suggested that the Tsar should read this letter on the toilet and then use it as toilet paper because he was very self-deprecating. He seemed to feel like he was maybe a little bit under a shadow with Nicholas, maybe just a little bit. Apparently some things had gone on in Russia before he'd left. We'll be hearing about that, not in today's section of the letter, but in the one after. And then he's writing from Palermo, and he thought to go to Taormina, but his father had advised against it, so he went to Palermo instead. So that's where we start off today, diving right in. From Petersburg, I went to Paris, where I spent 5 days. I felt so weak that parties and events were out of the question. I found Papa and the Countess in good health. Both are completely occupied with their move to Tsarskaya, which they plan to carry out at the end of April, old style. From Paris, I came straight to Palermo, where I am staying in a nice hotel outside the city, away from the urban dirt and noise. The hotel is right on the sea, with terraces that have stairs going down to the beach. And walking along them, you can hear the soft and caressing sound of the waves. On the day of my arrival, the weather was bad. It was raining and incredibly windy. Then it cleared up and was wonderful. The wind continued for 3 or 4 days, and now it's really wonderful. I am positively coming back to life with each passing day. I'm already tan, and my cough is almost gone. The air is so splendid. To show you how life-giving the air is here, I'll just say that there's an Englishwoman who arrived a month ago in a terrible state of nerves and so weak that she could barely stand. Now she's playing tennis, dancing, and taking walks to her heart's content. Okay, let's stop there. This is just a brief section of the letter, but I decided to do that because there's some really interesting things coming up. And I want to do those things together. I mean, I don't want to break in the middle of that text, and if I'd included them, it would have just been way too long. Okay, so we'll do this next time. So this is Dmitri in one of his poetic moods. Perhaps you recall going all the way back to 1906 when he was 14, how he liked to write in his diary. Sometimes these very poetic and wistful, descriptive passages. And here we have the soft and caressing sound of the waves, and we have the life-giving air. And you know, this was this was him. You know, it was his half brother, Bodya, or Vladimir Paley, who was the one who was known within the family as a brilliant young poet, already brilliant and full of great promise for the future. But Dmitri had that side of him too. I think he belonged to the sort of dreamy and poetic strain within the Romanovs, which definitely existed. You look at also Grand Duke Konstantin Konstantinovich. And in Nicholas II, you know, he was a little too on the dreamy side. Dreamy not in the sense of, you know, attractive, oh, what a dreamy fellow, but you know, tending to have moments of reverie, and I don't, I shouldn't speak confidently about that, but in the case of Dmitri, it certainly was the case. Though he had a very practical side as well, and wasn't typically sentimental. Anyway, that's a little side path. Why did he leave Russia in March? He was an active duty officer at this point. Well, apparently, specifically because whatever crisis was going on, either in his actual physical health or mental health, or both. And so it wasn't a time one would typically go. But, it's not yet Pascha, so it's not, and he's making a long stay, so it's not for the Easter holiday. But anyway, he only spends 5 days in Paris, goes straight from Paris to Petersburg, only spends 5 days in Paris. And the interesting thing about that is, in the later diaries, after the revolution, when he meets people in France, a lot of times you find out that they were people that he got to know and had jolly times with in France in 1914, in Paris, and he was also in Rome. And so obviously this 5 days that he initially spent in Paris when he was feeling so lousy was not the full story. He would end up recuperating and then going and having his experience of the high life probably later in the summer, although the war broke out in August. Anyway, he tells us that he's feeling in Paris, feeling so weak that he couldn't go out. And so the two things that he mentions here in this letter are a cough and this mysterious weakness. And the mysterious weakness comes and goes, and almost always in relation to periods of crisis, sort of existential crisis. The cough also comes and goes. If you recall, in 1915, he would be having an operation, a tonsillectomy, and something to do with his sinuses. And the cough could have been caused by that. It could have been allergies. It could have been, I think he'd had pneumonia as a boy, and it could have done some lasting damage. You all know that I don't believe there's any indication that it was tuberculosis. But anyway, it could also have been nerves. But, could also have been, that he really did need to go to some warm place and recover from the cough. And he also, I think, reading throughout the whole body of the letters and diaries, I think he suffered from what we would now call seasonal affective disorder. And he talks about it, although not in those terms, because that's strictly a modern term, and how much happier he is in the sunlight, and how quickly his mood takes a downturn when it's gray and gloomy outside. He even thought about how nice it would be to move to Egypt. He really liked Egypt. But of course he never did. Okay, so an interesting thing that comes up in this letter that you probably all know about is that Grand Duke Paul Alexandrovich and his wife, Princess Olga Palais, still Countess Hohenfelsen, I guess, because that's how Dmitri refers to her, that after Paul's long period of exile, he was basically kicked out of Russia when he married Olga. And after that long period of exile, he was coming back to Russia. And technically, he could have come back. I believe as of 1912, the banishment was lifted. But, he and Olga had a life in Paris, and they decided to build a house, a brand new house in Tsarskaya. And apparently it was finished, and they were going to be moving in April. So they're getting ready for that. And apparently they didn't come back specifically as a patriotic impulse when the war started out. I mean, they built this house, they already had plans to move back. Anyway, what next? Yeah, and then we have this interesting case of this English woman, because here is a person who was suffering. They wouldn't have called it, well, maybe, but less, psychosomatic disease was more neurasthenia. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but you've got the neuro in it, you've got the direct connection to the nerves, not just sort of euphemistically, but the idea back then that the actual physical nerves in the body could be diseased in a way that would cause you just apathy and weakness. And I don't know if that term was still being used in the 20th century. It was very popular in the 19th century. But in all of these health resorts, you would have nervous disorders, even in the TB sanatoriums in Davos. For instance, Schatzalp or Dmitri ended up. They advertised treatment for tuberculosis, for lung disorders, and also for nervous disorders. So you wouldn't think that if you had a nervous disorder or depression or something, you would want to be living in a tuberculosis sanatorium around highly infectious people. And they did know that it was an infectious disease, but they don't seem to have, in a practical sense, really adjusted to that idea. So yeah, nervous disorders were something they treated in all of these health resorts. And indeed, Palermo in Sicily would end up having a lot of tuberculosis sanatoriums, but later. Anyway, this English woman, she comes, she's there for, how long does Dmitri say? About a month, and he's planning to stay for 2 or 3 weeks. And she makes this miraculous turnaround. She was so weak, she could barely stand. So weakness, again, is being equated with this kind of state of malaise and apathy, not like, an actual muscle disease where you can't lift your arm or something like that. She's in such a bad state mentally that she is just, inert and apathetic, and she can barely stand. Now she's playing tennis, she's dancing, she's taking walks to her heart's content. So Dmitri is clearly hoping that this is what will happen to him as well, and it's already happening. He tells us, I am positively coming back to life. Okay, so what do we have next time? Next time, we're going to find out what was really going on in Petersburg before he left, with his state of health and his state of mind. And we're going to talk about him doing some sightseeing with some surprising people who just happened to be there from Russia and from a sphere that one doesn't ordinarily connect Dmitri to. I mean, not aristocrats are people from court. And I was quite surprised. I remember when the first time I read this letter, that he was, joining this husband and wife on their sightseeing, and knew them well enough, and was, on close enough terms with them that he would do that. And let's see, how old was he? He was 22. He would be turning 23 that year, and 22-year-old, and these are middle-aged people that he's choosing to spend time with. So, that was pretty typical of Dmitri. He was very much at home with people older than himself, and always had been. All right, I see the crows are upset about something, so I will sign off, and please come back next time. Bye.